makes Disordered unique, we feel, is that we've both experienced crippling anxiety in the past, but kind of made a job out of educating and helping others. We're in a good place now with our anxiety, and wherever you are with your anxiety and you want to come to a safe space to hear not only help from professionals, but people who have been through it, just know that you're welcome here.
I would walk around with my hand on my neck, taking my pulse all day long, or checking my wrist, or leaning down and checking the pulse in my ankle to make sure there was one.
For me, wow, something awful is about to happen. And why does everything look and feel weird all of a sudden?
Mhm.
Welcome to Disordered Anxiety Help. My name is Joshua Fletcher, also known as Anxiety Josh, and I'm a psychotherapist based in the UK. I'd also like to introduce you to my wonderful co-host from across the pond, Mr. Drew Linsalata. How are you doing today, Drew?
I'm good, Josh. Thanks. As Josh said, I am Drew Linsalata. I am a therapist in training and a graduate student in the US, New York specifically.
Both Drew and I have a history of doing podcasts. We've had our own, but we decided to come together and combine forces and see what we can do. Also, off mic, we're good friends. We talk about anxiety a lot. Very passionate about the subject, and yeah, I'm really excited for this. Today's episode title is called "You Know You're Anxious When." You know you're anxious when. Drew, you know you're anxious when.
Oh man, we could just roll tape for 2 hours and I could tell you, oh, my old, I'm anxious when. I think this is that thing that speaks to like, what's the difference between just regular anxiety and when things go off the rails and the topics we often discuss. I know for me, and this is a thing I've talked about. I knew that something wasn't quite right. You're anxious when you're constantly worried that the orange juice has been poisoned, and you've never worried about that before. Suddenly, that's a thing.
Whoa, is
That
that
was a thing. That's how
your
I'm going to
first
start.
thing?
I'm going right for that. I
Oh,
lived through that for quite a while. That was an indicator that like something's not right here.
really?
I never used
Spoil
that.
orange juice. You know you're anxious when for me, wow, something awful is about to happen. And why does everything look and feel weird all of a sudden?
Hmm.
I've not taken any drugs. I've not drunk. Everything just feels quite spaced out and weird. My hands don't look like mine, and my thoughts have started to race. And I'm not in any danger. I don't think there's anything externally wrong. But why do I suddenly feel so different? And why do I feel like something awful is going to happen? That
Yeah.
for me was how it started. Let's keep going. Let's play. Let's play anxiety top trumps.
Yeah, I'll do better than that one.
Okay.
Yeah, you know you're anxious when things that you used to do without ever thinking about it would elicit huge waves of fear. Like, why am I so afraid to get in the car and drive away from the house? That's not.
Oh,
Yeah.
driving anxiety. I
Oh, I know.
guarantee you there'll be an episode on that.
Oh, yeah.
Massive one, driving anxiety.
Yeah.
Um, Another one, me. You know you're anxious when all your attention has gone from external everyday stuff to hyper focusing on yourself, sensations. Maybe there's, a tight chest. Maybe there's strange things going on. And that has all your attention. And you've got all these, you're kind of obsessed with how you feel. You're fixated on the body or the sensations all day.
Yeah. I had, I knew I was anxious when I would walk around with my hand on my neck, taking my pulse all day long, or checking my wrist, or leaning down and checking the pulse in my ankle to make sure there was one. That's I'm like, something's not right here. I
So-
knew that.
so- Some therapist compassion. I'm just laughing at you. There you
No, it's
go.
true. At the time, I knew it was completely ridiculous, but I felt so strongly compelled to check all these parts to make sure my heartbeat was right all over my body. That was a red flag.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I know you know this, and I know this because we've got quite a lot of followers on social media, but the
Mm.
amount of people I hear who compulsively check their fitness watches, oh, what's my heart rate now? What's my heart rate now? Yeah, to the point where with clients, I've actually said, let's, maybe it's okay to take the watch off for a bit now. I don't think if something catastrophic was going to happen with your heart, I don't think your Apple Watch is going to jump out and say you're going to die. So
Yeah,
you know, yeah, you're all right. And actually, it causes more anxiety than it doesn't for a lot of people because they're like, oh my god, I'm sat watching TV and my heart rate's 130. Like that's
yeah.
not normal.
And the first question is, "How did you know it was 130?" And then they're, "You checked your watch, didn't you?" So, thank
Yeah, yeah,
thank goodness there were no fitness watches when I was going through all that. That would have been a nightmare for me, an absolute nightmare. Yeah.
yeah. You're anxious when you feel like it's okay to troll Google for 8 hours a day, and despite it not providing you any assurances or little sprinklings of reassurance, you find that you're always drawn to the worst case scenario.
Mm. I have, you're anxious when you're in your online anxiety support group and you will just scroll endlessly to just see if anything is new, even though you have nothing you're getting, but you just scroll it anyway. I was that. I did that.
Really? Did you? So I didn't have an anxious community
Well, for me,
when it's better. Yeah.
yeah, when I started, I mean, listen, I got a couple of years on you, and there was no internet when I was going through the worst of it. When this all kicked off for me was in the late 1980s. There's
Ca-
no,
Carry a pigeon.
I know we were.
Does anyone else have chest pain?
I was sending smoke signals, whatever it took, like chiseling on rocks. But there was no internet. But when I went through like my experience while I was withdrawing from an antidepressant, I was on that was 2005. There was a website that I would just glue myself to every single day and just refresh the page and refresh the page and like nothing new has been posted in the last 45 seconds, Drew. What are you doing? So I know you're anxious when you get fixated at that level.
What do you think you were looking for?
I don't know. I mean, in retrospect, it was just a comfort scroll. It was anything, just anything to occupy me other than how I was feeling and what I was experiencing, I think. So it didn't
Hmm.
matter. And you don't want to see people, there you go, you're anxious when you're looking forward to see people posting their struggles, which is you don't want to
Yeah.
see people struggle, but yet it
It
was
does. It makes you feel less alone. Well, there's mine.
yes,
You're anxious when you feel alone, and actually, you're willing to. You take comfort in people's struggles, not because you're a sadist.
right.
I mean, you might be, but separately, it's because actually I feel less alone. I don't. I'm looking to find people to feel less alone, and we run anxiety groups and things like that, but very strictly and ethically, because yes, support groups can be great. But as you'll find out, the more you listen to Disordered, sometimes they can not be helpful and actually keep you in the sphere, the world of anxiety. Yeah, so that's my you're anxious when. What's yours? This is good. Let's keep playing this weird metacognitive game of ping pong.
One-upsmanship.
Yeah.
You're anxious when you start to make excuses to not socialize, to not go to events, to not. I was I made the craziest excuses, and in retrospect, I got to believe that my friends and family had to know that something was up. But I would make plans and then cancel them at the very last minute,
Mm,
all the
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did that as well, but in my head, I don't know if you can relate to it, but I had this kind of thought like, "Oh, I'm avoiding now. I'll do it when I'm better, when I fix myself. I just need to sit at home and ruminate a bit more."
Hmm.
You're anxious when you think you can think your way out of a problem.
Yeah.
I can think my way out of these feelings. If I mean, in years ago, I call it, finding the miracle thought. If I find the miracle thought and ruminate at home, along with the Googling and things like that, then I can be fixed and I can access my life again. So, yeah, avoidance.
Yeah.
That was a big one for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
just ruminating, never getting anywhere, but feeling like I could.
Well, for me, I would make a lot of plans, which I knew I was going to cancel. And by the way, that's my dog Copper in the background. If you listen to Disordered going forward, you're going to hear him. He
Yeah,
needs
Strudel's not here today, but you will also probably hear him at some point.
he
Yeah.
needs to be heard. But for me, I would make those plans, and I would be pretty much like 95% certain I was going to cancel them at the last minute. But somehow
Mm.
I thought that if the plans were a week in advance, that somehow in that week I would find the magic bullet that would make it so that I wouldn't cancel. I had no plans to do anything different, but I just hoped that somehow in that week, 7 days, that's enough time. I'll be able to go to lunch in 7 days. And then I would call and cancel everybody an hour before.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really
I,
yeah.
there was no logic to it at all. It was just an
Yeah.
emotional thing. Like, oh, maybe
Yeah.
I'll be better in 7 days.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was so agoraphobic, I just categorically refused to do anything, so I'd struggle to leave my room. You know, you're anxious when you feel like you'll lose control, have a heart attack, or die, or have a panic attack and fear panic attacks outside of your, and I'm doing air quotes, safe space. So, oh, if I go too far from my house or if I go too far from my safe space, by the way, which I'm probably having panic attacks in anyway, but if I leave that, something awful is going to happen. And I remember even before any diagnosis, I just thought me going to the supermarket or me going for a walk somewhere, which I'd usually enjoy, that would push me to the point where I couldn't cope or my body couldn't cope. So yeah, just to be cheeky and add another, you're anxious when, sorry, Drew,
It's
but
okay.
it's like, what if I push this? What if I push this to the point where I can't cope? Which I think is one of the core fears to most anxiety.
Yeah. It will be too much. You're
Mm.
anxious when you wind up, to me, there were those safe places, and the safe places got so specific. Like, if I feel this way, I must immediately run to my bedroom and lay on my back. It was very specific, or the bathroom, and I would sit with
Yeah,
my.
I did that.
Yes, it was very
Yeah.
specific. Like, I'd have to go to the bathroom because that on the bathroom I could sit on the floor with my back against the tile, which was cool. You're
Ah,
anxious when you build all kinds of crazy rules as to what will make you feel better or calm down or get through it in the heat of the moment.
yeah. And let's be very kind of honest. That was the most scared and most awful I've
Yeah,
ever felt. Like,
yeah,
this is not just like, oh, you're anxious, like really consuming. You're anxious when your life has been consumed by fear.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
You're anxious when you jump out of the car in the parking lot at IKEA. You guys have IKEA? That horrific
Yeah, we do. I mean, yeah,
Alice
there-
Wonderland.
there's some places that still give me anxiety, and it's nothing to do with my anxiety disorder. It's just
Yeah, when
so much.
you literally jump out of the car. I did that. We were
What?
waiting to park at an IKEA here in New York, and I'll never forget this. And I could feel the anxiety. It was just at that level where it's just right at the edge of boiling over all day long. And I didn't want to be there. I was terrified. I didn't want to go all the way to IKEA. I didn't want to walk through the rat lab of the maze of IKEA. I was anticipating the disaster, and it boiled
Rat
over.
lab.
It is absolutely a rat lab, and I anticipated it, and it just boiled over in the car while we were just sitting in the parking lot waiting to park the car, and I just jumped right out of the car and ran about 10 feet until it dawned on me, where am I running? But that intense urge to flee, the flash of panic, and I jumped out of the car, and the people in the car with me just sort of looked like, where are you going? Like, did we miss a meeting? Is there something going on here? And
We know IKEA is bad, but wow, well,
And I
that's
remember, and to come it back to one of my other, you're anxious when the embarrassment of that and trying to hide it. I had to quickly make up something, and I said, "Oh, I had a really bad cramp in my leg." I had no such cramp. I had a panic attack, and I tried to run out of the car, and then I shook my way through IKEA for the next 40 minutes, like
well
shake.
done for going through IKEA though.
I didn't go back for years. You're anxious when you refuse to do things that make you anxious, and I did not go back there for many, many, many years because of that.
Wow. Even though you went in.
Even though I went in, it was such a, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in future episodes. The
Yeah.
mechanics of that were such that it was such a bad experience, and I was hoping that I would just keep. I had no mechanism for calming down. Hadn't really developed any good skills at that point, and I didn't understand what was going on well enough. So I just forced myself through it, and I was shaking and sweating, and I must have went to the men's room 10 times. Didn't have to, but it was just an escape for a minute. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And you'll hear this phrase a lot in disordered podcasts because we're here to help you. We're not here just to explain to you how
yeah,
bad anxiety is. We're just being very transparent in the sense that, we live happy lives now. But it sucked. It's really bad. What Drew's just describing there is like something that we call white knuckling, which
mhm,
is a lot of people when they're anxious, they're brave enough. So Drew's brave enough to go through IKEA. I was brave enough to go to the supermarket once, and I did it, but I white knuckled my way through it. and I just couldn't wait for it to be over. And I went home and yeah, subsequently avoided it for quite a long time. So yeah, you know you're anxious when you white knuckle through situations, you grit your teeth, you go looking at that clock and counting down the moments you can go back to wherever you feel safest.
Oh, there was so much of that. There was a lot of that. Family functions and things of that nature, which were getting progressively harder and harder to get through until I stopped going to them. And again,
Mm,
now there's the, you're anxious when you feel like you're completely failing at life because you disengage with life. It was not good.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know you're anxious when you care what people think. When you ruminate and worry if people are going to reject you, humiliate you, bully you.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, and you know when you're anxious to go to a social event and you can go to the social event, and then you're worried about how you are, so you pour all your energy into performing. Don't get me wrong, there's an element of performance to a lot of social stuff, but it's all kind of done to alleviate any fears of being rejected, usually at the expense of your own voice. And then afterwards you might be in the shower analyzing what happened, in bed, tossing and turning. Did I offend that person? Did they find me funny? Whatever. Yeah, you're anxious when you're doing all that, and people's judgment is incredibly important to you.
Was that you? Was that your experience? That were
I
you?
didn't have too much social anxiety because I've always been a gobshite. But in general, it's doing things like drama and stuff. But my anxiety was from I've always worried about I think about what people thought,
Mhm.
but I was able to kind of have the energy and the confidence to project the person I feel I wanted to be. When I developed an anxiety disorder, that confidence took a knock. So yeah, I was afraid to show people. But actually, what a good thing was through the anxiety disorder is that I learned to be more me. Hence why we're doing this podcast. So if you're struggling now and you're thinking, God, these guys are laying it on thick, you're anxious. Know that if you can relate to this, I'm in a good place now. I'm happier and more mature than I've ever. Mature is probably debatable, but
I might argue that, but okay, we'll put that on the back burner for now.
yeah, yeah. But in general, that's where I mean, I've developed so much more as a person since doing and going through an anxiety disorder, and knowing and challenging all the prejudices around it being weakness and things like that. And oh yeah, no, so if you're hearing this now and thinking, all right, well, I can resonate to some of this, or you might not resonate with some of it yet. We've not finished yet. There's
Oh
plenty more
goodness.
cards in this anxiety deck.
We could literally go for hours and hours. You're anxious when you feel like you have lost yourself. To me, I would pine away for like, where did that guy go? I thought for a long time before I developed an anxiety disorder, I would have described myself as not an anxious person in any way, shape, or form. I wasn't afraid of anything. I would just do stuff. I didn't think about anything. And then suddenly I had to pine away for that guy. Where did he go? Where did the armor go? Where did the shields go? Where did the confidence go? Like I didn't think he would ever come back. So I
Mm,
know a lot of people listening might feel that way. Like I was never like this. What happened to me? Where did I go?
mm.
And I spent a lot of time just sort of almost grieving the loss of somebody that I thought was never going to come back. But to follow up on your statement, the good news is he did come back, but better. Like those lessons that I learned in that experience, which was horrific, but a better version of me came back. So, which I'm
You upgraded your firmware, Drew.
I
That's it.
did. It was a total reboot, and it took a long time. So a lot of control alt delete, my
Yeah,
brain. But yeah, you're anxious when suddenly you don't even know who you are anymore. Like you're,
yeah,
yeah, you're entirely based on fear.
yeah. I remember at the worst of panic disorder. So I've got, I did have panic disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I remember with panic disorder, it started when I was at work and I was making a cup of tea, and I suddenly felt this sense of doom and detachment. I felt like I was in the matrix. I felt like I was going crazy. My thoughts were just racing like crazy. My chest tightened. I could feel my heart like palpitating, but then skipping beats.
Mhm.
Um, I could see these floater things in my eyes. I couldn't catch a full breath, and I felt high, but high without the joy and euphoria. It was like a high, like a whoa, and you're talking like it's 8:30 in the morning. Like it's not. There's no reason for me to feel this level of this. And what I now know is that that was a panic attack or the start of a breakdown. But then I've become so fixated on how much that scared me and ruminated so much that it became a bigger thing. And no one really told me what it was. Like some people mentioned it was a kind of panic attack and stuff, but I thought panic attacks, were, people hyperventilating, rolling around on the floor, doing that. No, I just froze. I went pale and suddenly, and it's changed my life. At that moment, like you said, Drew, suddenly I just got on my day and then suddenly bang,
Mhm.
the anxiety itself became the problem. I developed a phobia of feeling that out of control. And so, but I just thought there's something wrong with my brain. So I went home and I don't blame myself for this because no one told me. My doctor didn't tell me. I was just given antidepressants. I said, but I'm not depressed. I just felt really scared all of a sudden. Don't get me wrong, as anxiety went on, I felt depressed, but that's another story. But like, yeah, just knowing that experience was so, it is like a complete new chapter. And if you don't get it, you get it.
Yeah,
There's a difference between conventional anxiety and disordered anxiety. And if pretty much what we've said so far is all on the disordered side. Uh, don't get me wrong. If you're conventionally anxious, we'll talk about that on this podcast too. It's just it's as important and just as valuable.
yeah.
But if we're drawing from our own experience, you're anxious when suddenly your life can change in a moment and you become totally obsessed with how you feel.
Yeah, in that moment, first panic attack stories. You're anxious when you have your first panic attack. I would agree, and I was in the safest place in the world. Everything was going so well in my life in that time, and I felt no stress. I had not had any sort of previous like, oh, I'm stressed, nothing like that. And one night, I was literally just reading a book. Like I was in the house I grew up in. There was nothing wrong, and I was like instantly depersonalized, which I had never felt before. But in retrospect, we'll talk about this one day. As a kid, I would feel that. Now I know what
Same,
I'm feeling.
so much same. Do you
Yeah,
realize it? Like
yeah.
sitting in a corner of a room and feeling like the room is super far away. I
That's exactly right.
dissociate. Yeah, I dissociate as a kid and enjoy it. I
Yes.
also I also had, the heart flutters and palpitations.
Mhm.
I had that as a kid and enjoyed it because it felt like I was on a roller coaster.
Isn't that amazing, the different
Yeah,
interpretation? I can remember
yeah,
very clearly under the age of 10 telling my mother, "You look like you're so far away right now." And now in retrospect, I know what that was. I didn't know what it was back then, but I didn't give it a second thought. It was just, I don't know, this is weird. Like I didn't even think about it.
yeah. I had that too, but it wasn't a problem.
No, I didn't interpret it that way. But when it happened to me when I was 19 that night, I my interpretation was instantaneously, this is what it feels like when you die. I was convinced for a couple hours at night that I was dying. And when it was over and I managed to kind of get out the other side, not knowing what was happening to me, I thought for sure I had somehow magically dodged death. I didn't know.
Mm.
And that night, I mean, people ask me sometimes, how long does it take to develop panic disorder? Honestly, in retrospect, my own personal experience, I would say about 3.5 minutes because I was
Mm.
so afraid of that happening again that it became my entire focus.
Yeah,
Everything changed in that moment for me.
yeah.
It was
I will
just
explain why in this podcast as well. Like, actually, it makes sense why it happened. Your brain didn't break,
no,
and people get to their anxiety, whether it's a diagnosis or whether it's a problem, in their own way. But we can talk about because we work with hundreds. I mean, to get collectively thousands of
yeah,
people,
yeah.
and that isn't hyperbole.
No,
Genuinely,
that's
whether it's through social media or for me in my practice here.
mm,
And there's usually themes that go through it that you can link to, and not just the word trauma. Don't get me wrong; you can be anxious and experience trauma. I was going through a lot of trauma at the time when I developed panic disorder,
mm,
but I didn't develop PTSD, thankfully. Well, I did a little bit, but I'll explain it to you later. And what we're going to do is talk about, from our collective experiences, both personal and professional, what you can do to help yourself in this podcast. And, obviously, this isn't a replacement for therapy, but what it is something, a place where we've kind of ciphered through all the nonsense and the crap out there, and there is. Don't get me wrong, we're not the doctrine of all anxiety help, but all we're going to provide to you is, yeah, our experiences, and our professional training. And if these words and this podcast helps you, jump on board. Um, we plan on having guests on and talking about different modalities and experts and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
and as we go on, the podcast will evolve. You're anxious when you're trying to explain and overly promise to your listeners things that you haven't even planned out yet.
You know you're anxious, but right, you're trying to jam everything into
Yeah,
one
yeah,
22-minute podcast episode because what if we miss something? I
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you want a prophet on here? We'll get a prophet on here. We'll do everything.
no
Do you
problem.
want the, yeah,
I'll
do
call
you
my
want this
dad.
in spatial audio? Do you want us to massage your shoulders? Because this podcast will do it. For some people pleasing coming out there. There we go.
We do have a lot of cool plans like that, and we're making some of it up as we go along. There's no doubt about it because I think that's sort of baked into both of our personalities. But I think that the one voice also that we feel is gonna be really important here is yours. So we have a couple of really great ideas in terms of letting you guys pop in with voice messages or little video clips of things that you did successfully, met challenges, or asking us questions that will all evolve over the next couple episodes. So stay tuned for that. We'll invite you to ask us questions that we'll play on the air. We'll answer them. We'll share your wins.
Yeah, let's do the did it anyways. Do you remember when I did that? It was, and I haven't done it for a while. Let's put it on this podcast. It was
Yeah, we
great.
could totally do that. In my Facebook group, we have Wednesday wins where people post their exposure challenges and they're so happy and they cheer for each
Yeah,
other.
but
So we'll bring that stuff here.
Drew, that's your fault. You're compressing joy into one day a week. There we go. you
I
know,
am
did,
the joy compressor.
did you win? Did you win on Thursday? Well,
No,
according to
sorry.
Drew, that doesn't matter.
Put it in your back pocket. We share those on Wednesday. Yeah, I get it. So no, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot to offer here. And we've spent 20 something minutes rambling about our own anxiety experiences, and we can't possibly cover everyone's experience because it is very wide and very varied. But if you
Should
resonate
we
with any of
should we
this,
quick fire or quick fire? You're anxious wins. Just
oh
to see,
sure.
to try. Let's widen the net. Okay, I'll
Yeah.
go first. You're anxious when your digestion is off.
Yeah, you're anxious when your digestion is off, and then you try to control every last thing you eat, and you only eat four foods because you think they won't make you anxious.
And then you're monitoring stuff like your bowel movements and things like that, and your weight. That was actually a big trigger for my OCD,
Yeah,
which I had a trigger not so long ago. I remember I shared with you where just one day I stood on the scales and I was a bit lighter than what I thought I was.
yeah,
And I was trying to lose weight at the time, so it was good news. But my OCD was like, "You're dying. There's evidence immediately right now."
wow.
Completely off out of the blue. I was like, "What?" So strange.
Mm.
You're anxious when you find it difficult to say no to people.
Yeah, that's a good one. You're anxious when you walk around with a blood pressure cuff in your car all the
Oh,
time.
yeah. That's a
Mhm.
good one.
Yeah.
That's a good. You're anxious when you sweat more than usual.
Oh yeah. Oh God, that was me.
Mm,
Constantly hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, or at least it
yeah,
felt that way. Guessing my
yeah.
body was the same
Hot
temperature all the time.
flushes, hot
Oh,
flushes and stuff as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The middle of the winter, run outside to stand in the snow, and then be freezing, and then stand in front of the heater, and then run back outside to stand in the snow. An
yeah.
hour later, really?
And it's like if particularly for menopausal women, and like, is this the menopause? Is this my anxiety?
Sure.
What is this? Do I pay attention to this? Do I not? Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think
'Cause-
one of the common themes that you're anxious when you worry about everything, but then you worry about worrying because you shouldn't worry.
yeah.
That's a
So
common.
worrying and then meta worrying.
Yes, the worry
Yeah,
about the worry.
yeah. I worry about the worry. Oh yeah. You're anxious when you avoid doing things that you usually do, like having a wine. Now we're not, you avoid having a wine or a beer. No, I'm not
Mhm.
saying alcohol is good for you, but I am avoiding that just in case it makes me more anxious.
Or
That was a
coffee.
big one.
I can't tell
Coffee.
you how much time I spend talking about coffee and tea and things with caffeine in it in my community. I'm amazed. It should just be the coffee podcast at this point.
Yeah,
But
I did that. Did you do that? I avoided all caffeine.
all caffeine. I remember at one point too, you're anxious when you eat. It was like a ice cream thing. It was somebody's birthday. I don't remember. And there was like ice cream sandwiches from Carvel. Anybody who lives in the East Coast of the US knows Carvel and Tom Carvel and his voice in his commercials. And they had those little flying saucer things. And I guess the cookie part of the ice cream sandwich had a lot of cocoa in it, chocolate. And I ate it and didn't think about it. And then I was absolutely beside myself for 2 hours because my heart started racing because it was caffeine in the chocolate part.
Oh,
And
also tyramine in dark chocolate sends you nuts.
wow,
It's
okay,
great.
that's
It actually makes you feel good. It's one of the chemicals in dark chocolate. It's very good for you. It's
yeah,
healthy. It's fine.
yeah,
Tyramine and caffeine. And I think I had some decaffeinated chocolate once, and I remember having it, and I was like, I feel wired. Like, and then I was worried that, well, if there's no caffeine in the chocolate, then something must be wrong.
something's
And
wrong.
actually, tyramine is really quite a strong chemical as well. It's a stimulant.
I had to Google that.
Uh, yeah, tyramine. I mean, don't avoid it. Like, enjoy
Yeah,
the chocolate. But I remember back at the time obsessing. There we go. You know you're anxious when you're checking the ingredients
yep,
on your. I know you did this, Drew.
I did that. I did that. That's true.
I
I did that.
Yeah. I always think of you when I hear that one because I get clients now and then like, I'm checking the label on like
I did.
paracetamol that I've had all my life and it doesn't really bother me, but suddenly I have to check now.
Yeah, that's another one. You're anxious when you will not take an aspirin, you will not take a Tylenol, you will not. You have a headache. I won't take an. And that is interesting because that habit persists to today for me. Not because I'm afraid anymore. Actually, my knees were killing me last night, so I did take 2 Tylenol last night. And even now, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when I'm opening the thing, it's like I'm going to take 2 Tylenol because my knees are sore. I really thought back to the days when that was terrifying to me to swallow those, even though it was an open bottle. I taken others, people in the house had taken them, but for some reason, I would worry that maybe this is the time that I have some sort of crazy reaction to this.
You just developed a massive, even today. Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've
I
had that.
wasn't afraid last night, but it did bring me back to those days when I'm like, oh, look at me taking a Tylenol without even thinking about
You know, I've had that with kind of drink spiking.
it. Oh,
So like
okay.
even in like I've not thankfully I've never had my drink spike, but like if I'm in a quiet pub with four of my friends, and I know they wouldn't do that. But for some reason, like sometimes I have to go back and be like, what if someone walked past and put some in my drink? It's like, well, there's no one in here. You know,
Yeah.
okay, it'd be a bit different if I'm in a nightclub or whatever. Not that I go to nightclubs anymore. No one wants to see that. But like, and my drinks on the side. And yeah, actually, I wouldn't advise people to leave the drinks unattended. But it's a bit different when like you're in a
Mhm.
an old pub. There's like 10 of you in there. So
Yeah.
half of you are your friends, and no one else cares. They go to the toilet, but that thought kicks in. Or what if it does happen? And then suddenly you're hyper vigilant. You're checking for signs of spiking, and but then you're misinterpreting signs of the anxiety as the first sign of being drugged,
Right.
and away you go. Obviously, no one has ever done that to me, but yeah, in general, that's that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think as we go
you,
through,
yeah,
we'll flesh that out a little bit. Like as you can see, we live through those experiences, but those experiences still stay with us to a certain extent. So I still have that thought about the Tylenol, the pain reliever when I took it. You could be in a pub and still have that thought. What if my drink was spiked? The
yeah,
difference now is you can have the thought, recognize, oh, this is that thing that my brain does sometimes, and move past it. So
yeah.
we'll talk about what that looks like to be fully recovered. It doesn't mean you never think that anymore. It just means that it's inconsequential for the most part when you do. So, we'll go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. Okay. I'll do one last one
Sure.
because we want to keep these
Make it a good one, man.
yeah, it's good. You know you're anxious when you've got an internal critic where every time you want to try and achieve something and be brave, and bear in mind, if you're anxious, you're listening to this podcast or you're trying to get your life back on track, well done to you. Seriously,
Mhm.
it's tricky and we've been there. And you might not feel your best at the moment. You might not be you feel 100% in yourself, but go easy on yourself. But you know you're anxious when you've got an internal critic and that puts you down, that compares you to when you weren't anxious, or compares you to the perfect version of yourself, or maybe it's an echo of a voice of an abusive relationship, or a horrible, neglectful parent, or whoever. Anxiety will exacerbate it. It will put a megaphone to that internal voice and keep you in that cycle. And we've named this internal critic, who will be a feature, because Drew and I have run successful podcasts, but what we've agreed on is that this podcast will be compassionate, not to each other. We're going to roast
No,
each other,
never.
but to
Absolutely.
you, we're going to roast each other. But in general, but to the anxious person, it's really, really important. And what's the name of our internal critic, Drew?
Well, he's always looking over our shoulders.
It's Craig the critic.
Yeah, he'll be around.
We had a discussion because in the UK, Craig, it's called Craig. Anyone is called Craig is Craig, and you Americans call it Craig.
Craig.
Craig. Yeah, I mean, wow. So
I'm pretty sure when Craig appears, sometimes he'll be Craig and sometimes he'll be Craig. You just won't know when.
yeah. So if I call him Craig the critic, he'll call himself Craig, and similarly with Drew, if he calls himself Craig, he's like, actually, my name's Craig. You're getting it wrong already. So that's where we thought that. So listen out for Craig the cricket.
Yeah,
Craig the cricket.
Craig the cricket.
Oh yeah, that's
that sounds good. Yeah, we'll edit that out. That's fine.
Yeah, and we'll start as well with some success stories in the next episode as well. But for now, thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Disordered, the first of many. Hopefully, it depends on if Drew's orange juice has been spiked.
That's exactly right. Well,
yeah, poison. There we go.
yeah, that'll be up to you guys. But no, I mean, I think I enjoyed the we'll it was a good start for us. And like, come back and listen to episode 2 and hang in there with us. And any sort of feedback you want to give us through all the different social channels and everything, we'll give you all the links and want to hear from you. So see you in the next one.
See you later, guys.
All right, we are out. Hey, it's Drew. Thanks for joining Josh and I for the maiden voyage of Disordered, episode 1. We're still working out the details, social media accounts, and things like that. But if you want to know more about Josh or me or the Disordered podcast, find us on the web at disordered.fm. That's disordered.fm. Join our mailing list so we can let you know when there are new podcast episodes available. And we'll also let you know how to reach out and ask us questions and share your wins so we can answer them on the air and share your victories with the community. Thanks again for joining us for episode 1 of Disordered. We'll see you next time.